Hello, my name is Shannon Sand. I'm an agricultural economist working for the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and I'm going to talk to you about cash flows today. You might be asking yourself, why is someone from Nebraska talking to me in Hawaii about cash flows? Well, I used to work at the University of Hawaii for about 4 years in the areas of ag business, finance, and management, and recently made the move back to the mainland to be closer to family. So I do have quite a bit of experience there. So if you have any questions or anything like that, my contact information is listed somewhere on the screen. Our objectives today are going to be to learn about what is a cash flow. Why is it important? How is it constructed? And then how can cash flows be used to make decisions? And I do want to preface that this is a very brief overview. Generally, when I do full-on cash flow construction, it can take a few hours to get through an entire program related to that. It's very brief and very short, but there are resources at the end of this, and I have provided a PDF to Melee and the others that you can access all of the cash flows yourself. And again, my contact information is on the previous slide. Feel free to send me an email, give me a call. I'm around. The term cash flow refers to the net amount of cash and cash equivalents being transferred in and out of the company. Cash received represents inflows, while money spent represents outflows. Cash flow is the movement of money in and out of a company, ag business, anything along those lines. Cash received signifies inflows, and cash spent signifies outflows. The cash flow statement is a financial statement that reports on a company's sources and usage of cash over time. A company's cash flow is typically categorized as cash flows from operations, investing, and financing. There are several methods used to analyze a company's cash flow, including the debt service coverage ratio, free cash flow, and unlevered cash flow. So now we're going to talk about the types of cash flow. There's operating cash flow, investing cash flow, and financing cash flow. And these all kind of go into your cash flow statement or cash flow budget or cash flow projection, depending on what you want to call it. And they all serve a purpose. So the operating cash flow is just that. How do we operate the business? What money are we using to operate it? So it refers to the net cash generated from a company's normal business operations. So when you sell your calves, when you get money for those, or do you retain ownership for those when you ship them to feed on the mainland, or if you retain ownership and you feed them out to be grass-fed, grass-finished, and sell them locally in Hawaii. So things like that. Again, how do we pay for all of this while it's during that time period, right? So that's really important. In an actively growing and expanding company, a positive cash flow is required in order to help maintain business growth. Depending on where you are in your business cycle, you may just be about maintaining, so it may not need to be as positive, but you do want to try and have an operating cash flow that's in the positive, again, because that's what helps pay all of our bills, our current immediate needs, things like that. So investing cash flow, this refers to basically net cash generated from the company's investments related activities. So it can be things like equipment, it could be property, right? So land gains value over time, particularly in Hawaii the last few years. Property prices, I think we all know those have done, stuff like that. So your investing cash flow is from things that you invest in that are going to gain value over time. It could be property, it could be equipment, depending on the piece of equipment. It could be a lot of different things. And in healthy companies that are actively investing in their business, because again, it's also what you're investing in your business. So maybe it's fencing and things like that. This number will often be negative because, again, you're making that investment. Oftentimes, it's medium or longer term types of investments. So things like that. And then financing cash flows, and this refers specifically to how cash moves between a company and its investors, owners, or creditors or lenders. So it's basically the net cash generated to finance the company and may include debt, equity, and dividend payments. So this could include things like loans, different notes that you have, credit cards, things like that. So it's how you're financing your cash flow. This one could also potentially, again, depending on how you're financing it, be negative too. So we're going to discuss a little bit about the importance of cash flow. The cash flow can be used to establish a loan or a repayment schedule that will coincide with when revenue is coming into the farm and business. This can be important for the farmer as well as the lender. If you don't have a lending note, it can also be important though, just because you know when your money's coming in and going out. So if your insurance bill is due in December, but you generally don't get paid until January, that gives you some flexibility to discuss with your insurance agent, things like that. But also it's important financial tool just because it helps you understand when and if an investment can be made during the year. You can look at your historical cash flows as well as your projected one and see, okay, are we projecting enough income this next year to make that investment in that piece of equipment or that piece of property, or to take on an additional lease, or to buy those additional cows? Like, can we afford to do that? Can we swing this, So it really does help you to look and plan better. I always think of cash flows as kind of a good solid roadmap. Obviously there are going to be different twists and turns you have to make along the way, but it's a really solid map and guide to help you figure out, if you're looking to make certain investments throughout the year, when can we do that? Should we renegotiate when bills are due and things like that? So it's just so helpful. Kind of like I said, you can use this information from the cash flow statement to determine liquidity problems. So again, when is my cash coming in and when is it going out? So if my cash inflows are not enough to cover the business expenses and the operating loan is higher at the end of the time period than it was at the beginning, then you might have some liquidity problems. So if you're having to use a lot of credit or credit cards or revolving credit to cover some of these, it really does help you look at it from a different perspective and really see that from like a 50-foot perspective, if that makes sense. So you kind of see outside, you're like, oh, okay, we're using this and this, the cash flow here. But at the end of the day, are we negative or positive? So do we have a liquidity problem? Are we making enough? You can really use that cash flow statement to determine which expenses can be adjusted or if it's possible to reduce some, in order to help with a liquidity issue if it's there. So are we spending a lot on fuel that we don't need to be spending? Or did we buy a new truck that maybe we should have bought a used one? It's not necessarily an option all the time, but things like that. So you can use that in combination with a balance sheet and the income statement. So we're going to talk a little bit about cash flow versus profit. They sound very similar and they are related, but they're not exactly the same thing. So cash is constantly moving in and out of our businesses. So for example, when we purchase, a couple of calves, some pigs, some hogs, that's inventory purchases. So that's money flowing out of the business towards a supplier. When we sell something from our inventory, so we sell eggs or we sell baby pigs or we sell, calves to market, or we have like a grass-fed, grass-finished animal that we're selling, out, that is cash inflows or cash flows into the business from our customers. So paying workers, utility bills, water, all those things represents cash flowing out of the business towards the debtor while collecting a monthly installment on a customer purchased finance. So maybe we sold a calf to a 4-H'er or a FFA'er or something, and we let them finance it for 6 months or a year to pay it off. Things like that. That shows cash inflow to the business. So there's a lot of different options, and I'm sure you're thinking of way more than I am in ways that this can be in your personal business, how that is utilized. So profit is typically defined as the balance that remains when all of a business's operating expenses are subtracted from its revenues. So it's what's left when the books are balanced at the end of the year or the end of the day, however you choose to look at it, and expenses are subtracted from our proceeds. Profit can either be distributed to the owners and shareholders of the company. So if you have investors, because some folks I know do have investors into their operation. So again, those are your shareholders. So how they get those in forms of dividend payments or reinvest back into the company in stocks or in terms of shares, things like that. That could be considered a form of the profit, right? So profits might, for example, be used to purchase new inventory for a business to sell things, or it can be used for on-farm research and development. I think a lot of producers in Hawaii participate and do a lot of on-farm R&D. So try new things, try new techniques, try different stuff out. That all costs money to do. Or to try new products and services. If we have a new feed supplements, new options in terms of like supplementation or things like that. I don't know why that's where my mind is going right now. It's talking about feed supplements, but it is. But there's, lots of different options. Like maybe there's a new fencing option that's better suited for the climate and things like that. So, something like that, but it's probably more expensive than the traditional. So like cash flow, profit can be depicted as either positive or a negative number. And when this calculation results in a negative number, it's typically referred to as a loss because the company spent more money operating than it was able to recoup from those operations. So again, they're related, but they're not exactly the same. Those cash inflows and outflows do go into whether or not we make a profit. But at the end of the day, profit is our total revenue minus our total expenses. So again, very related, but the cash flow is more of when is money going in and when is money going out versus total profit. Did we make money? Which is always a good thing. What's included, you might be asking yourself. Well, there's quite a few things. We're just going to go over a few of those. So, it's a positive, hopefully, cash inflow from the operations. Positive capital asset sales. Did we sell land? Did we lease land? Some of these things. Did we sell some equipment? Some stuff like that. Did we sell eggs? Did we sell calves? What have we got going on? So also things to consider are things like non-farm sources of income, which should be included if they're used to help pay your farm bills. A lot of us will have off-farm jobs to help pay for our insurance or our family's health insurance, but sometimes that off-farm job can also be used to help supplement and pay some of those farm bills, especially in lean years. So if that's the case, you do want to include some of that non-farm income that's been used to help pay those bills. So, remember, think about that if you have an off-farm job. Cash outflow from the operation. So what have you spent money on? Did you have to repair and buy new fence? Did you have to build new cages, new crates, things like that? Non-farm outflows of cash, including family living. Did you take out a dividend? Do you have shareholders that get a dividend? So if so, and again, this really does count for family operations. So if you are trying to get to a point where your operation supports you and your family, you do want to kind of include some of those non-farm outflows of cash, including the family living. That's really important because the cost of living, as we all know, has gone up the last several years. So things like that. Do you have any debt that has to be serviced? Do you have any loans out there? Do you have any, revolving credit lines, things like that? Do you have any new borrowing? Do you have any money because you took out an additional loan? So that is new money that goes into your cash flow. So like, that's cash into your account, right? I mean, eventually you're going to have to pay it, but you can definitely take out new borrowing or new sources of borrowing. So it would also include things. I wouldn't include new borrowing, but if you have grants or things like that, you would want to include those in here as well, because usually you only have those for 6 months, a year and a half. Depending on the grant, it won't be too terribly long. That will give you a net cash flow. It basically consists of cash coming in, cash leaving the business. So net cash flow, you really want to be positive or at least zero or breaking even. While it can be negative on a spreadsheet, in real life, we all know it has to at least be zero, even if that means bills and debts are not being paid. So that does make it hard, but that's the reality of it. We really want to at least break even, but ideally have a positive cash flow. So you might be asking yourself, well, that's a lot that's included in that cash flow. So what's not included in the cash flow? Well, those things are things like depreciation, inventory changes, and then changes in accounts receivable and payable. So it's really important to remember that the cash flow budget is not the same as an income statement, especially an accrual income statement. And in fact, they're quite different. The cash flow budget does not include non-cash items like depreciation, inventory changes, and changes in accounts receivable and payable. However, the cash flow budget does include principal payments, cash payments for capital assets, and new loan proceeds that the income statement does not include. So a farm manager can cash flow real nicely for a while by just selling a few cows, pieces of machinery, a few acres of land, or parcels of it, or just allowing accounts payable to continue to build. The accrual income statement, though, would quickly identify the situation as unprofitable, but the cash flow budget may see a positive. So it is really important to make sure, while I really like to focus on the cash flow budget, it's important that you have all of these statements in some form or fashion. But if you're using QuickBooks or Quicken, it's pretty easy to do. So you can do that literally with clicks of buttons. So the cash flow budget is also not a substitute for the enterprise budget. The enterprise budget does break it down per enterprise. So it includes things like depreciation and opportunity costs, both of which are not non-cash items and not found on the cash flow budget. So again, remember, cash flows are really a great idea to get an idea of when money's coming in and going out and when things need to be paid and like, are we liquid? But it doesn't necessarily give you a whole farm picture. It just kind of gives you a little map and a guide. So you might be asking yourself, what are some ways knowing our cash flow could be helpful? I know we've kind of talked about it and stuff, but we're going to go a little more into it here. So the cash flow budget is a plan of how cash will be coming into the operation and leaving the operation. The key word is cash. If cash is not entering or leaving one's pocket, then it does not go on the cash flow budget. So the cash flow budget provides three main functions. And that is, it forces the planning function of management. So it really forces you to look at when are those inflows and outflows happening, and do I need to change when some of my bills are due? Do I need to renegotiate some stuff? Things like that. And also, it really gives you a good idea of, okay, are we spending like 30% more for a lease this year than last year? Do we need to look at maybe just letting one of those go? Some of that, I mean, I know we don't like to talk about that as a whole, but that is a thing that we do have to think about. Like, can we afford to keep this piece of property? Is it really making us the money we need to make in order to maintain? So, or expand. So, and it provides a means of communicating the amount and timing of borrowing and investment needed with the lender. So if you have a lender, if you have FSA, if you have a bank or an ag lender, it allows you to really be like, hey, this is when my inflows and outflows are happening. What can we do about this? What should we look at? Are there expenses we should look at cutting down? Do we need to look at increasing certain things? You know, this is our family living expenses. This is what we're spending. You know, again, inflation and things like that have happened over the last few years considerably. So some of that stuff, looking at that and being able to communicate some of that is going on and have discussions around it. During times of low profitability, cash flow is a survival strategy. So completing the cash flow budget requires that you plan ahead, know and or estimate what you need to raise, input needs, input costs, output prices, capital asset replacement, sales or purchases, and other factors that could either provide or take cash from the business. In lean times, cash flow really is a great risk management and strategy tool. So those of y'all I've worked with before know that I'm really passionate about risk management and strategic planning. Cash flow is one of those key things. It's pretty quick and easy to do once you've done it and maintain. And it is a really solid strategy to help you survive in lean times when things can be tough. By using the cash flow statement and the cash flow budget, you can make well-informed management decisions such as when to purchase new equipment or when to sell things, when to open lines of credit, if you need to cover cash deficits, if you need to take on, and we don't like talk, no one wants to talk about it, but there's a lot of us that have second and third jobs, you know, things like that, when not to, things like that. Some of those, again, it opens that discussion. So we have a lot of options in how we choose to set up our cash flow, and that's really just what works best for you. Some folks do a monthly. That's my general preference because I like to know when money is going in and out. You have the option to do quarterly. I have an example of a quarterly cash flow here. My face is covering part of it up, so I do apologize, but you will have access to copies of the full cash flow after this. So that just covers, again, every quarter or so, and it would be your setup, so whatever works best for you or your operation. So like January through March, it could be April through May and blah, blah, blah. The rest of the time goes on. So, again, it's just whatever works best for you. It could be twice a year. So some people do a biannually, which I'm going to call it twice a year. So every 6 months. And then some people like an annual one just because it's real easy. And they're like, okay, I just want to compare what I did last year with this year. What are my differences in expenses and things like that? And I do want to say these cash flows, this is a really basic one. You can go really detailed. So you can get down to electric bills and utilities and like fuel and stuff and your labor. It all depends on how precise you want to be. And again, that is your level of detail. So it's entirely up to you. This one is a pretty basic one. We've just got our beginning cash balance. So how much do we have in the farmer ranch checkbook, excuse me. Our beginning cash balance, we have the sale of crop products. We have the sale of livestock products. So, crop products could be, did you have mac nut trees? Do you have lychee? Do you have other stuff? So your livestock is, your calves and things like that, if that's what you're selling, or if you're selling a finished product, your finished product. So did you get any government payments? You could substitute this out, obviously, for things like grants and stuff like that. Or, if you have a loan or something that the cash is inflowing from that, then you'll have your total inflow. Then after that, you have your expenditures. So you have things like seed, fertilizer, feed, if any. Did you fertilize your pasture, things like that. So all that goes in here. Processing, did you pay to process? Did you retain ownership? Do you have bills from that? Things like that will go in here. Marketing, capital purchases, interest, debt payments, total expenditures. And then again, like I said, this is based on a quarterly schedule, so it's every 3 months. So it's really nice. And you can see that like some months it's negative. So my head's kind of in the way, but you can see that. Here is an example of an annual cash flow. In this case for 2023, we're kind of estimating that we will have 50,000 in on-farm revenue from sales of livestock. And we are debating about adding in some fence to our property. So things like that. So how much is that going to be? And then we're looking at like payments, how much that is. So our total cash in is 255. Our total cash out is 147,000. If we add in the fencing of 10 grand, obviously it could be way more than that. This isn't a big place clearly. So, and you can go through and do very quick an annual cash flow statement here if you have some of these numbers that you can add up. It's pretty easy to do. Again, this one is from Michigan State University. You will have access to a blank copy of this via the links provided. And if you want, you can definitely go in and add your own. So this was made up very quickly on the fly. So lots of decisions, and I'll try not to overwhelm you because you might already be close to being overwhelmed at this point. So really, cash flow budgets and cash flow statements are great ways to help monitor and control cash inflows and outflows. It can help you plan for budgeting and cash needs when you're going to need that money. If your kids got soccer or whatever, you got to use all this stuff because, again, it accounts for your family planning as well, or your family expenses. So you can really use it to help time some of that stuff, and like from your family budget to your cash flow for your business, it's all kind of related. And it can help you identify ways to more efficiently time payment. And if you're selling calves in the fall and your insurance payment is due in the spring, it might be time to talk to the insurance person and see if we can adjust that, right? There's a lot of different ways to use that cash flow budget to monitor and control your cash outflows and inflows each year. And there's a couple of different ways to really develop that cash flow budget. You can use last year's actual cash flow and then just adjust the outflows and inflows by what you think they're going to be in terms of expenses and income. And then you could also use, if you have an enterprise budget, to build the cash flow budget. This method is really quite detailed and takes into account changes in, different cropping and fruiting and livestock production, such as different acres that are in different crops. So if you have a lot of enterprises, so if you have mac nuts and papaya and coffee and I don't know, carrots and lettuce and cows, it might be a good option because it really will help you to look at it it's a more detailed point of view for that sort of cash budget or cash flow budget, sorry. So it's really good, but mostly cash flow budgets in general, like I said, help you monitor and control when your money's going in and out, really gives you an idea of when that is going in and out and what your like needs and plans are. So I think that's super helpful in terms of planning for your year. These are the references that I spoke about earlier. You will have access to all of these. I will send a PDF to Mele so that you all have access to them, and you can click on any of these. If you have any additional questions, though, feel free to get a hold of me. My name is Shannon Sand, and I'd be happy to help you out. There are a lot of tools out there, a lot of guides, and we can help you get where you need to go. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself, Melilani Oshiro, Dr. Mark Thorne, or Dr. Dylan Fays. You know, one of us can definitely help you, but this is my contact information if you need to get a hold of me. Thank you, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Mahalo.
Mahalo and thank you again for watching. I hope the information shared in this video will be useful for your production system. Please take a minute to fill out our feedback or evaluation form by scanning the QR code on your screen or clicking the link in the description box below. Your responses are anonymous and will be used to provide valuable information to our program sponsors and to help support future programs for our Hawaii ranchers and agriculture communities. And then join us August 31st, 2023 for our live Q&A session where you can speak and ask questions to any of our speakers. Mahalo and thank you again for watching.